This is Moscow, and this was the plan to change it forever. One of the largest buildings of the entire planet, placed dead in the center of the city. The Palace of the Soviets. 450 meters tall. Almost certainly the heaviest building ever designed. Taller than anything on Earth at the time. It was supposed to be the ultimate symbol of communism. The flagship of the entire Soviet project. But today, there's a problem. The Palace of the Soviets doesn't exist. It never got built. The foundation sat there for years, half finished, doing nothing, and eventually the whole plan just died. And honestly, what replaced it was a bit ridiculous, an open-air public swimming pool, sitting where the largest building on the entire planet was supposed to stand. But what if it hadn't gone that way? This is the story of one of the most ambitious architectural projects in human history. Let's jump back to 1920s. Until 1917, Russia was an empire ruled by Tsars that changed violently with the Bolshevik Revolution. The old Russia is dead, the new Soviet Union is born. But a new empire needs new symbols. It needs to prove to its citizens, and more importantly to the rest of the world, that the system is superior. And in the 1920s and 30s, the ultimate flex of national superiority was the skyscraper. Over in the United States, capitalism is building monuments to itself. The Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building. Marvels of engineering that scrape the sky. Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, doesn't like these developments at all. So the regime decides to strike back. Stalin wants a building that will surpass the Americans in every conceivable metric. He wants a headquarters for the Supreme Soviet. A building that will last forever. But a building of this magnitude requires a location of equal importance. You can't just build the center of communist world in some empty field on the outskirts of Moscow. It needs to be dead center. It needs to dominate the skyline. The Soviet planners scope out a location, on the banks of the Moskva River. It is the perfect spot. There is just one problem. The site is currently occupied by the Cathedral of Christ the Savior. But this won't stop Stalin's ambitions. On December 5, 1931, workers packed the cathedral with dynamite. Engineers had done the math. But they didn't know how strong the old stone walls really were. The first explosion shocked Moscow. When the smoke cleared, the cathedral was still standing. It took more than one blast before the huge dome finally fell, and the whole building came down. It took thousands of workers, more than a year, just to clear the rubble. Some of the marble was salvaged and used in the nearby Moscow metro stations. The bronze bells were melted down. In 1931, the government announced an open competition to design the palace. 272 proposals flowed in. The choice lands on a Soviet architect named Boris Iofan. His design is unique. It's a tiered tower stacked with circular levels. But Stalin is a control freak who isn't very easy to please. He personally intervenes. He demands the building act as a massive pedestal for a statue of Vladimir Lenin. And he tells the architect's quote, "Don't be scared of height, go for it." The final design reaches a height of 450 meters. For comparison, it will be a decent bit higher than the Empire State Building. Around 21,000 seats are spread across the main Grand Hall, which is 100 meters high and 130 meters wide. At the very top, there is a statue. The statue of Lenin alone is 100 meters tall. His head is the size of a concert hall. His index finger is over 4 meters long. The entire building will weigh around 1.5 million tons. It was the ultimate symbol of megalomania. But here's the problem. Nobody actually knew if it could be built. Building a structure 450 meters tall is one thing. Building it in 1930 Moscow is another. The chosen site, sitting right next to the Moskva River, was a floodplain. The soil beneath it was soft clay, sand and mud. This is perhaps the worst possible foundation for what will be the heaviest building on Earth. To support the 1.5 million tons of steel and stone, Soviet engineers had to design an entirely new type of foundation. They excavated a massive pit and drove thousands of concrete piles deep into the bedrock. They poured two enormous concentric rings of concrete to act as the base. The structural steel required for the frame was beyond anything the Soviet Union had ever produced. They needed advanced fabrication techniques, high straight alloys, and engineering calculations that simply didn't exist yet. Entire steel factories were commissioned and built only to supply this one building. In 1937, construction finally began. For a few years, it actually looked like they're going to pull it off. By 1939, the massive foundation was complete. By 1940, the steel skeleton began to rise out of the ground. It climbed past the first few tiers, a towering web of metal visible from across the city. But then, the war came. On June 22, 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Overnight, the priorities of the entire nation changed. The Soviet Union was now fighting for its very survival. The thousands of workers building the palace were drafted into the Red Army. The budget for the project vanished, and that massive heavy steel frame rising in the center of Moscow, it suddenly had a lot more value as weaponry than it did as a monument. In the 1941 and 1942, Soviet workers dismantled the steel skeleton of the palace. The advanced high-strength steel beams were loaded into trains, melted down, and forged into anti-tank hedgehogs, railway bridges, and fortifications to defend the city. After the war ended, Stalin briefly considered restarting the project. Boris Yeltsin drew up new, slightly scaled-down blueprints, but the momentum was gone. The Soviet Union had lost tens of millions of people. The economy was devastated, and Stalin's attention had shifted to a new, more practical project: the Seven Sisters. A ring of smaller, but still highly impressive Stalinist skyscrapers that are actually buildable. The palace of the Soviets was officially dead, but the story doesn't end there, because for the next decades, the massive circular foundation of the palace sat completely abandoned. It was a giant flooded hole in the exact center of the capital. Until 1958, when the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev came up with an incredibly pragmatic and bizarre solution. If they had a giant circular waterproof concrete pit, why not just let it water? And so the foundation of the palace was transformed into the Moskva pool. It became the largest open-air swimming pool in the world. It was an architectural anomaly. Spanning 130 meters in diameter, the pool was heated year-round, even in the dead of the freezing Russian winter. In the early 1990s, the Soviet Union collapsed. The communist experiment was over. The Moskva pool, suffering from decades of decay and lack of funding, was finally closed and demolished. The new Russian government, looking to heal the scars of the 20th century, made a decision. With the backing from the public, they decided to return the site to its original purpose. Using modern construction techniques and referencing the original 19th century blueprints, they rebuilt the Cathedral of Christ the Savior, exacting almost every detail to the one Stalin blew up nearly 70 years prior. The palace of the Soviets never got built, but in a weird way, it's still the reason that whole part of Moscow looks the way it does today. Thanks for watching.